Welcome to week 6, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. It's a rainy week, so wherever you're taking this class from, hope you're staying dry. My socks are currently pretty wet, but that's beside the point. The work this week is kind of taking a look at the second half of our essay assignment for Essay 2. The goal of Essay 2, again, is rhetorical comparison, to take a look at two different authors' attempts to engage their audiences on different topics. We talked last week about what rhetoric was all about. We looked at Singer and Diamond and Hecker and saw three very different authors talking about three very different topics in three very different ways. And the goal of this essay is to take two of the 5 essays that are up for grabs in the prompt for essay two, and basically do what we did with Singer and Diamond and Hecker. Although we're not juggling 3 necessarily, but rather than necessarily just talk about whether we like them, we're actually examining the ways that they go about building their arguments. So what are they doing to present to you a reasonable, sensible, well-founded argument? What kind of evidence do they use? How's their reasoning? What's their approach in terms of overall organization? Where do they start, and how does that sort of get the reader sort of receptive? And then the next level being that level of how they present themselves, or at the very least how they come off as authors and speakers, writers, based on the kinds of words they use, the kinds of imagery they invoke, the kinds of things they say about themselves and who they are and what their values are and what their credentials are and what their experience has been like. The things that they do to present themselves to you as someone who knows about the subject, that you should take seriously, that has your best interest and your goodwill in heart. So in comparing these two, the kind of criteria for comparison has already been given to us. Those are the things that we're going to compare between these two articles, which addresses one of the two big things about comparative writing that you have to kind of pay attention to, which is making sure that the points of comparison, the criteria for making the comparison for the similarities and differences, is upfront and clear and apt. You don't want to compare two different aspects of an author's rhetoric. You don't want to compare two different aspects of anything. You don't want to compare apples and oranges. You don't want to compare apples and hand grenades. You want to make sure that your reader can see that what you have to say about why these two things are similar and different matter, or at least the result of the comparison, for the sake of the result of the comparison, that is. And the other is kind of how you approach just organizing your thoughts. You kind of have to, since you're presenting two different quantities of information to your reader, and you're hoping that your reader can see something meaningful in that representation, in that juxtaposition, you kind of have to think about how you organize your or your essays, but specifically your paragraphs, right? You'll have in this essay essentially a paragraph on their use of evidence, their reasoning, their overall sort of message, and the organization and the sense thereof and the reason thereof, and then second paragraph how they present themselves. But if you didn't have that, it would be up to you to kind of not only make that plain, but also figure out how you relay that information. The notes for this week kind of talk about two broad ways that you can do that, and that is block by block and point by point. And this is within a paragraph, but within a paragraph you might say, well, Singer's essay or Singer's use of details and reason and sources is much different than Jared Diamond's. On the one hand, and then you'd say everything about Jared Diamond, about how he presents himself sort of neutrally, and how most of his evidence is rooted in historical knowledge of past civilizations, and how his essay is organized to make connections between what happened in the past and what is happening now, and show not only examples of how societies have collapsed, but how societies have survived. And all of this is framed in a discussion of him sort of pondering on New Year's Eve what the next few years would be like, and then at the end saying that in his ponderings he is hopeful, right? And so he's presenting a message that is very sort of straightforwardly just making connections, not really, making a strong call to action, but just sort of presenting these ideas and saying we probably should think about this, but I'm hopeful about how things will turn out. Whereas Singer, on the other hand, his reasoning is almost entirely based on hypothetical situations where he draws a parallel between the hypothetical and a sort of real world incident. Bob refusing to pull the trigger that would have saved the child's life, pull the handle that would have saved the child's life from the train, even though it meant sacrificing his car and therefore his wealth and his money, is to Singer analogous to people who could pull the trigger and help a kid but don't. And it's a direct sort of relationship that he draws between those two and that he expounds upon throughout the whole essay. He does use some figures, he does use some stats, and he cites some people beyond himself. He refers to another philosopher named Peter Unger. But then after making this parallel that he knows most people will object to, he then proceeds to kind of build his argument around various counterclaims that might come up, and the things that people would say to object to this idea that they should voluntarily hand over all their superfluous money, the things that they would do to buy just fun luxuries for themselves. And he addresses each of these ideas one by one. It's a very different kind of building an argument. But we can make that comparison, not necessarily for the sake of saying that one is better than the other, although I'm sure we have a preference, but for the sake of saying, well, here's what they were trying to do, and here's how successfully they pulled it off. Here's the difference in their approach, is sort of the point. And the point of observing that difference is just to sort of be aware that these three authors that we read last week and these five that are up for grabs for this essay could have tailored their essays and their arguments any way that they wanted to, and they chose this. They chose this way. And so why? What did they think they were going for, and how effectively did they pull it off? And what's the difference look like? That's the point of this essay. So this week is comparative writing. I'm asking you to compare a fictional city to the city of Knoxville based on population, economy, and crime. You kind of have to read the sample essays, or the sample paragraphs at least, in the notes for this week in order to kind of see what I'm asking you to do. So check that out. Pick your own fictional city. Doesn't matter what it is. Have fun with it. If you have questions about this, let me know. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to kind of clarify anything that I need to. But next week is the last week before fall break. Really the only task before us next week is writing this essay out and getting it submitted before fall break, kicks off in earnest. So between now and then, let me know if I can be of help. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week. Stay dry. Talk to you soon.